Hi and welcome to this week's episode on the guest list. I'm your host, Steve Guest. A huge welcome to all my listeners and really excited to get chatting to today's guest. A bit of an introduction in case you haven't listened to any of the previous episodes. This podcast has really been born out of the success of my book, Top Biller, The Life of a Recruiter. And I was looking for an avenue to continue to create content and add value. And I felt that the best way to do that was to interviewing people that have gone through various journeys and can come in and continue on that journey with me. And we're looking to inspire and motivate and empower anybody that listens to this podcast to go on and achieve bigger and better things. All the guests that I look to interview on this podcast have been nominated and put forward through my network, and there is a link between high performance, high achievement, top billing status, motivational leaders, and today's guest is no exception at all. So before we get chatting, I'm going to read through this person's bio and just give you a bit of an introduction to who they are. So this person has worked in the recruitment industry for nearly 12 years, starting as a trainee consultant at a life sciences executive search firm before working their way up the ladder through to principal consultant, top billing status, and up to team leader of £1 million teams. As part of the expansion of the business at the time, this person was tasked with building a fit-for-purpose learning and development function to support the growth of the business into the US, Asia, Pacific, and Europe. With new starters all the way up to sales managers across the globe, in order to maximise the potential of all involved, playing a major role in the rapid growth of the business. Outside of work, this person is a professional rugby coach, having learnt their trade at Leicester with the academy before becoming the youngest director of rugby within the National League setup. This individual has also coached within elite rowing and football and brings with them a wealth of experience from the tried and tested people and cultural development strategies within elite sports. Now running a leadership consultancy business called Team Head Coach that works specifically within the recruitment industry with small to medium-sized businesses who are looking to scale by investing in their leadership teams to create high-performance cultures and developing winning mindsets. This individual has now worked with over 500 recruitment leaders across the world over the past few years. What an extensive bio, as always. Mike Whatman, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, pretty good menu there. I haven't got much else to say after that.
How are you today? Are you good?
Yeah, good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm very good. Looking forward to throwing a few questions at you and having a conversation. So, right, before further ado, obviously you've been put forward to this podcast. Why do you think you as an individual have inspired other people to put you forward to this podcast?
I think as that very thorough introduction suggested, I've got a very, very broad experience, and I've been very lucky by quite a young age to have experienced a huge amount of different high performance environments. And I think with how I approach leadership, people development, culture development, I kind of combine a real background of because my education was all medical sciences as well. So I kind of my approach to leadership and people development combines kind of psychology, sort of like neuroscience, obviously business acumen from doing the job for so long as well, but also the experience working within kind of elite talent development organizations within professional sports. So my experience to empower people to achieve what previously seemed unachievable, I do so in a very, very different way to your normal kind of management training that other people may have experienced in the past. And so I think people find it really interesting to link sport and neuroscience and psychology to what they can learn from that to maximize their own potential and achieve things that maybe they didn't think possible to start with.
Mm-hmm. I think you said a couple of great things there, and I think do you think the relationship between sport, obviously you've worked at the elite level. So the intensity, the competition, the level of expectancy from that level of sport compared to, I suppose, the comparison across businesses as well, and recruitment being a competitive environment to be.
Yeah.
Do you think the kind of correlation between the two has helped because you've almost surrounded yourself inside and outside of business?
Yeah, for sure. I think there are obviously some things where they don't correlate. So, for example, in professional sport, you're training for 95% of the time and playing 5%, whereas in recruitment, you're doing your job for 95% of the time and training for maybe 5% of the time. So there are obviously some disparities there. But I think in terms of what it takes to be successful in both, there is a huge amount that can be learnt, because those who are top performers, irrelevant of their field, whether it be rugby or IT recruitment, those who are the top performers are the ones that are continually getting better, the ones that are continually looking to learn and focus on the process and focus on their performance rather than the outcomes. Whereas obviously some people can be very outcome focused and will cut corners and get there however they may do, whether in sport that might be by taking something that's illegal, that means they can run 100 meters faster, or in recruitment it's maybe strange kind of terms negotiations or kind of ignoring people's exclusivity and sending CVs or whatever it is. Those who actually find consistent success, there are so many parallels that you can pull across by consistency in performance, focusing on their processes rather than the outcomes, and also constantly learning and constantly striving to try and get better. There are those things that are real kind of crossover parallels where the top performers in each field share those traits. So yeah, there's a huge amount that you can learn rather than just I think sport in the past has been used very much for the inspirational side, someone who's overcome an injury and then come back to perform really well. Whereas actually there's a huge amount more that we can take from the world of elite sport that can actually help us improve our efficiency and improve what we're doing as recruiters and recruitment leaders, which can make us more efficient and can make us more profitable without us really having to do a huge amount of work behind it. So yeah, definitely, the combining of the two has really helped me in my career.
I love what you've said there. Now, I've made a career, certainly over the last 15 years, of kind of championing process and systems. I am your spreadsheet savvy, borderline OCD. Everything's got its place and position, and I love stats. I love anything that kind of combines numbers and strategy. And I think certainly in the early days, that's what set me apart from pretty much all of my competition in recruitment. Because it's very much about that relationship, outwardly going, positive, kind of loudest person in the room type environment. And you so kind of succinctly put within your kind of answer there about the fact that systems and process, whether it be sport or business, if you get to understand it and you get to understand how it all fits together, and then you can start looking at those incremental 1% gains along the way, actually becomes far more powerful than just going ahead and trying to achieve something.
For sure. And we talk about systems and processes and things like that, but really you're creating habits. And that's the key. And you can call them what you like, systems, processes, habits, whatever. But what it's about is about identifying the behaviors and the activities that when things are going well, that's what you're doing a lot of, because success leaves clues. So when things are going well, what are we doing? What kind of activity levels are we at? What kind of activities are we doing? And for example, successful teams in sport or in business have all identified those winning behaviors and then go, right, in order for us to be successful, this is what we need to do. And then everyone in that team knows that. And that becomes their system, their process, their habit. So for example, the Barcelona football team under Pep Guardiola, when they went through that huge period of time where they were just unbeatable, they had two key behaviors that they knew if they did them every game, they would win. So the first one was, as soon as they lost possession of the ball, for the next 5 seconds, every single player on the pitch would just hound the ball. They would just run after it, because they knew that once the most likely time to lose possession is when you've just got it, because you're not in the right system, you're not in the right setup. So they thought that, well, they knew from experience that if they just hounded the ball back, they had a greater chance of winning the ball back. So that was one of the things. So everyone knew, as soon as they lost the ball, everyone knew what to do. And the second thing was they knew that if they had more than 65 to 70% possession in a game, they would win it. So they focus on keeping the ball, which is where that kind of tiki-taka idea came from, where they just kept the ball, kept possession, kept tiring people out. And there were their two key systems, basically, that they knew if they consistently performed that every game, they were more likely to win than not. And so what it's about is about, finding out your version of hounding the ball, finding out your version of 70% possession. So what does that look like for you in your business, in your team, in your company? And then making sure everyone knows that and everyone's on the same page, because everyone knows what it takes and everyone's clear on their role. And one, it gives you more time because no one's asking you questions. But two, it means everyone's pulling in the same direction that we know generates success. And that's an unstoppable force.
I love that. I love that story. I haven't heard that before. And I'm an avid football fan. I've escaped that that kind of analogy. But I suppose as well, it also brings us back to the ability to deliver on the deliverables or control the controllables. You hear it bandied about quite a lot. Certainly at the moment, I kind of see it certainly a lot in recruitment. And I think you mentioned it earlier on as well, in the fact that quite often recruiters will focus on the end fee or their end productivity in terms of how many placements have they made this month? What's the end fee value? Have they hit the target? And the problem with that is you're focusing on the end result and not how you get there. And when I'm talking to recruiters, quite often I will say you need to focus on the front end. You need to understand how to get there. I get that, and perhaps work backwards. But you need to know how many CVs you need to get out, how many interviews you need to be arranging, how many conversations you need to have to get to that point, to then know that the fees will take care of themselves if you do enough upfront work. And it's having the understanding of what are your key tasks that will deliver on the results, not focusing on, I've got to hit 10 grand this month. Where's that coming from? I'll just get that one placement.
Definitely. If you focus on the process and you focus on the activity, the results will look after themselves. If you're doing the right activity, that's the key. So you need to take the time to understand that I'm doing the right activity. And then once you know you're doing that for certain, don't worry about the outcomes because they'll look after themselves. And also another part to that as well is that if you just focus on outcomes, it's very binary. So if you don't hit that, if you hit that, it's success. But if you don't hit that, that's failure. Because of the binary idea of hitting a target, right? And so if you miss your target a few times, you're constantly reinforcing the idea and belief system that you're failing, which creates limiting self-belief and self-doubt, and it increases the stress on the body, which isn't healthy for you either. Whereas if you focus on the process and let the outcomes look after themselves, you're removing that stress input as well. So it's another reason why not to just focus on the outputs. It's healthier for your body as well.
And we, within your bio, we talked about having the idea of a growth mindset and practicing that. And it's something that I've had to get used to doing. And I don't know whether it's almost like a typical British thing. Even when things like when people say, how are you doing? We always tend to say, oh, I'm not too bad. You're already focusing on the fact that you're not too bad, not as bad as you could be. And I think just in its simplest kind of form, having a growth mindset does not necessarily come naturally.
No. But the cool thing about a growth mindset is that it can be developed. So people might sit and think, oh, well, or they might be told they have a fixed mindset around a certain thing. But the cool thing is that with the right action and the right attitude, a growth mindset can be developed and can be made better just by delivering the right actions. So it's about changing the narrative in your head. It's rather than thinking, oh, I'm not going to hit that target because, the market's slow. That's kind of like a definitive statement point. Whereas if you change it to asking yourself a what if question, well, what if I just get one client who's all of a sudden hiring? The market doesn't need to be really busy, but if I can just get one client who's hiring 2 people, that I can hit my target this month. And it's about changing those conversations that you have inside your head and working on it and kind of not seeing things as finite. And also understanding, like looking back from when you started to where you are now, you're better at your job. So you must have a growth mindset because you must be able to get better. So you must be able to take it on. So it's just kind of very much about taking the time to yourself and changing the conversations you're having rather than from being direct statements and make them what if questions. And that's a really good way to start developing a growth mindset. So don't worry if you think you do have a fixed mindset, because the cool thing about mindsets is that you can work on them.
Yeah. It's having that self-awareness, isn't it? We were having a team meeting yesterday and we were talking incentives and how as a business we can reward the staff here. There's only 4 of us, so it's a close-knit group, but I want the business to be able to offer back for high performance and delivering on what we set out to. And I asked everyone to put together a list of maybe 10 to 15 things and remove the idea of cost. Just think of ideas. What is it you want to go and do? What is it you'd love to go and experience? And just write the list. And then it's not about, we'd never be able to do that, you can't afford that. It's about, how do we get there? What do we need to do to be able to make sure these things happen? And it was a really good conversation, but it's amazing how individuals will stop at certain things because they think it's outside of things that they can grab hold of.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of, you see it everywhere that growth happens where, challenges, like outside your comfort zone is where growth happens. And that's why it's so important. And there's actually, this is going to get proper geeky. But there's actually, so your brain you have a potential, right? In terms of the talent that you've developed and the skills that you've kind of harnessed over time. And the optimal level of difficulty to help your brain develop is 4% harder than your ability. Right now, how on earth do you measure 4% more difficult than what you can do? However, the point is that if you stretch yourself just enough, you can develop yourself. And that's kind of like the optimal way to keep improving. If you try stuff that's too hard, then you're going to give up because this is impossible. It'd be like, I don't know, me trying to learn like nuclear physics from scratch now for a test tomorrow. I'd be like, I'm not going to get that done. And that's fair enough because that's just too difficult. But then equally, if it's too easy, your brain doesn't develop and doesn't stretch and it doesn't form the neuroplasticity. It's like, well, I can do this in my sleep. It'd be like, you had to, do a walking test tomorrow or something. It'd be the same thing. So it's about finding where your stretch limit is and what your 4% looks like. And if you're constantly operating at that level, then you're constantly going to be developing and constantly growing. So yeah, there's a fact for you. It's 4% is the optimal level for development and performance improvement. So there you go.
It's a great stat. It's a great stat. I wonder how many people listening to this podcast truly feel like they push themselves. Because, as I say, the human natural instinct is protection, isn't it? It's
100%. We're wired negatively. We're negatively biased. And that's how we're wired. That's why, like you said, it's how are things? Yeah, not bad. Rather than good. Or it's kind of, it's usually say, oh, is that a new shirt? Oh, this, I've had it for ages. It's like we play everything down because we're negatively wired to protect. And that's the job of the brain, is to protect us. And that's why it systemizes everything. So we can constantly be aware of threats because it's trying to protect us. So it's constantly, negatively wired. And a part of the work that I do with leaders about giving feedback is they find giving negative or developmental feedback so much easier than giving positive feedback. They think positive feedback sounds forced or contrived or fake, whereas negative feedback, I can do this in my sleep. Yeah. But just again, because we're negatively wired, it's easier for us to speak negatively. And it's exactly like you said, our first response would be like, if we don't understand something, we're more likely to say no. Which is why when you do BD work, if the client doesn't understand why you're calling or what your value is, they're more likely to say, no, thank you, we're not interested. Whereas if your value is clear and the reason for your call is clear and they understand, they're more likely to engage and answer questions and give you some time. So, there's so many examples on a daily basis that highlights that us as humans are just a miserable bunch by evolutionary psychology. We're just a grumpy bunch.
I know. Well, even my kids call me the happy grump, so I can't even argue with that statement.
No, exactly the same. My little girl, my dad, so her granddad, he's called Grumps as well. So that's what he's called, rather than Gramps, he's Grumps. So yeah, like I said, it's everywhere. There's no
getting. I think the wives even called me Victor Maldrew every so often. So I think there's no escape. So towards the end of your bio, we're talking about developing and creating high performance cultures.
Yeah.
And that kind of winning mindset. What would you say in terms of certainly from a recruitment perspective? So you have run-of-the-mill recruiters that are good at what they do, and they do a decent return, they hit their targets, and they kind of go unnoticed to a certain degree because they just do what they are expected to do. And then you've got these people that come in, let's call them perhaps mavericks, and they just fly through anything. There's fees and placements happening all over the place. What is the difference between perhaps your average level of performance and those elite kind of level high performers? What are the perhaps character traits?
For sure. So for me, high performance is about consistently delivering to the best of your ability at that time. So obviously they're like, and you described it perfectly earlier about controlling the controllables. One of the really cool things about working in recruitment is that we're working with people, right? And we get to talk to people and learn from people and have really interesting conversations. But then one of the biggest challenges of working in recruitment is that we're working with people, and they can constantly change their mind, or they can make behavioral decisions based on the mood of their cat that day or whatever. And so some things we just can't control. So for me, high performance in recruitment is about consistently delivering to the best of your ability at that time. And also having the ability to understand what it takes to, from an activity perspective, to be successful. So what are your winning behaviors? Because as soon as you understand and have the clarity on what your winning behaviors are, consistency in performance is about limiting the gap between good days and bad days. Right? Because everyone knows if once you worked in recruitment for more than 45 minutes, is that it's peak and trough nature, right? You will always see it in any recruitment business, and you anyone listening to this who's, like I said, who's worked in recruitment for more than 45 minutes will have had a good bit and a bad bit already, because that's just the nature of the role. But the consistent performers and those who excel and who we would class as kind of like the top billers, the elite performers, they have the ability to limit the difference between a good and a bad day, because that prevents the size in the gap between the peak and the trough. So when they're at a trough, you've got a long way to go to get back to a peak again. Whereas if the difference is minimal, you're just constantly projecting and going on a good trajectory of consistent growth. And so if you've got like contract runners, they're constantly building. If you've got perm fees, it's constantly building. Whereas if you've got a massive discrepancy between good and bad, then it's kind of like contract runners are high, then they fall off a cliff. And then you have to work really hard to get them back to where they were, and then they fall off a cliff again. And so those performers will constantly bill 150 every year, right? Whereas the guys and girls who elicit that consistency and limit the difference between good and bad, they're the ones that will kind of go 150, the next year 250, 350, 400, and continue to accelerate on. And so for me in recruitment, that's the foundation for high performance, is firstly consistently doing your best at that time, understanding what behaviors and activities are needed to be successful, and then by doing so limiting the gap between good and bad, because that enables you to consistently grow rather than having to constantly fight against the tide when you have a bad month. So for me, if you can nail those three things, you're on your way to making some really good revenue for both the business and yourself.
I think it attached to that as well. We talked about the winning mindset, and I've talked, I think, across a number of these podcasts before, where recruitment is, I don't think there's any other vocation out there that's even similar to recruitment, because even after I've recruited the same desk for 15 years, I know the majority of people in my market.
Hmm.
And they can still let you down, even after
Of course.
15 years. They can still say something completely random and you never saw it coming, and it can hit you sideways and you sit there thinking, where's that come from? And
Mhm.
it can still knock you back a step or two. And having
Yeah.
the ability to almost detach yourself from, I suppose, emotion in those instances, which is really difficult to do, certainly if you're in the early days of just starting out in recruitment. Because I remember at the time I used to take everything that went bad as personal, and it was almost a slight at me, and it was
Hmm.
something I should have done or didn't do or could have done. Having that winning mindset, having the ability to pick yourself up again, having the ability to go at it again, because all the problems always happen on a Monday morning at the start of the week before you've even got going, and you
Yeah.
finish the week on a high, celebrating all weekend for it to come crashing down around you on Monday.
Yeah.
How do you kind of keep that winning mindset and that ability and that belief if you perhaps haven't been there yet?
Hmm. I think the key is like we said earlier, is about having the systems and the processes in place to know that you've done your best. So say, for example, use the example you just said. You've worked on the same desk for 15 years, and still sometimes someone could say something to you that is like a left hook out of nowhere that you didn't see coming,
Yeah.
and floors you. The whole point of having clear processes and systems and structured questioning and all that kind of stuff, the reason for it is that it limits the number of times you're going to get left hooked. Whereas if you don't have those processes and there isn't the consistency in delivery, then it could be a right hook or an uppercut or a whatever that knocks you out. Whereas if the systems are clear and have been put in place to reduce the chances of you getting hit, then you can be confident that I've done my best. I've done everything that I can do. I've asked every question. I've delivered on everything they said. I prepared them for the interview properly. I prepared the client as well as I could. If you can look in the mirror, okay, there's a lot to be said about self-confidence and success in recruitment, because resilience and mental toughness, of course, but equally, if you have the ability at the end of each day to look in the mirror and say, did I try my hardest? Did I do everything I could do today? If you can look in the mirror and say yes to that, then you can have the confidence that sometimes you're not going to win every battle, and you're not going to win every deal, because if you did, then you've completed recruitment and no one's ever going to do that, because there's too much success and opportunity to go around. So I think that's the key, is if you can look back on your day and you can genuinely look at yourself in the mirror and say, I delivered on the non-negotiables and the systems and the processes that we've put in place, and I did everything that I could, then I'm just going to put this one down to recruitment luck, or just the way of the world, that I'm not going to win everything. And I think the quicker you understand that people will make decisions on their own volition rather than anything that necessarily you've done, the easier it is. And you do become tougher with it. You do become more and more resilient. And like I remember my second hiring process, a lady turned down the role the day before she was meant to start after completing her 4-week notice. She called me up and said, I'm not going to be able to take the role because I haven't been able to find anyone to cat sit my pedigree cat and feed them lunch. I didn't even know pedigree cats existed, and it was a housebound cat that couldn't go outside. And I was lit, and there was a Friday afternoon, I remember, and we went out to like drinks afterwards, as you did back in 2010, 2011. I remember just being furious at this cat and furious at the lady that why didn't she tell me? But then if I think about it, that's my fault. I didn't ask her if there was anything that would prevent her from accepting the contract. Is there anything else outside of work that would prevent her from being able to travel there and travel back every day? So it's all well and good looking to blame externally, but actually if I do that mirror thing that I just said to do, and I said, did I do everything? No is the answer. I didn't ask that question. So then what I learned from that was, moving forward, I asked everyone if they had a cat for like every process for the next however many years. What cat have you got? Is it
Opened a
pedigree?
category.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hang up. Yeah, straight away. No more cats.
Oh, that's definitely new. I've had some that could probably push that one, but that is a good excuse.
Yeah, that was my second week in recruitment. I remember
Oh my
thinking, I was like,
days.
this is ridiculous. No, so it was my second
Yeah.
process, not my second week, my second process. Second process in recruitment. Yeah, it was rejected. You had to put it on the system. I just put rejected due to special cat. And then that was it. I never spoke to him again. Gee, that was up for me.
Dear.
That cat
Okay,
took
well,
2 strikes. That was out.
okay. So, I mean, it kind of leads me on quite nicely, but we may have, I suppose, covered it in part. But within anything like your career and in the path that you've gone through, whether that be in sport or in business, there's always failures along the way. There's always things that are, I suppose, turning points or instances that change your directional path. What would you say perhaps has been the biggest failure and what has happened to you, or what was the end result?
Yeah, sure.
It's an open question.
Yeah, so for me, as you kind of described in my bio, my life has always been around quite high performance environments. So whether it be like elite rugby, or it be sort of executive search, kind of like top end recruitment businesses, this is obviously going back, best part of 10 years. So it's different. It is different now. But if you combine those two environments, elite men's rugby, startup, high performance executive search firm, where it's very much who's got the biggest watch, who makes the most money, who's got the biggest house. And then you go to the rugby club and it's like who lifts the most, who hits the hardest, who whatever. It's very caveman, androcentric, puff out your chest, certain body part measuring contest everywhere you go, right?
Yeah.
So what I was a 23, 22-year-old, highly impressionable, highly driven, highly motivated kid, basically, who wanted to fit in, who wanted that life, who saw it, and saw the guys who was billing £500,000 and off to Dubai every 3 weeks, and had the Breitling and had the Porsche in the car park, and I was like, yes, that's a bit of me. But rather than actually focusing again on the process and how they got there by being successful and putting in the hours and understanding their market, I just created a character that would mean I would fit in. And so what I tried to do, I ended up living my life to impress other people. And so I was trying to, be this top bidder. And, it didn't really help because I did have success as a recruiter as well. I did, I was easily billing 400, 450, 500 grand a year after about 3 years. So I was getting the success as well, which was just fueling the fire. And so what it meant was it meant that I created this persona who was this louder, loud, larger than life, bit of a, I can't think of a word that's suitable before 9 p.m. Just not a great person, not the kind of person you want your daughter to bring home. Is probably a good way to describe it. Like the kind of person you'd avoid if you saw in a pub in London, that kind of individual. And what I realized was that I was living for somebody else. I was living to impress others. And for me, what that meant was a few years ago, I was about 28, and I was still kind of, materialistic things was important, and being the loudest in the room and being the richest of my friends and being the most successful was still so important to me, because that's what I thought the role needed, and that's what I thought the role required. And what happened is that unfortunately, about 3 years ago, I was very poorly. I spent a lot of time in hospital and had to have 2 surgeries to keep me alive. All of a sudden, and I was really unwell. And I realized on the second time that I was being taken down to operating theatre, and I heard the surgeon say to my wife, he might not come back up from this. All of a sudden it dawned on me that I was like, this life I've been living doesn't matter. Like all this material stuff, who cares? Why have I been living a life for somebody else? I've wasted so much time when I could have been creating memories and doing stuff for me and just focusing on myself and what's important to me, like family and friends and personal development and like giving back and stuff. And so for me, that was my biggest failure, that I was living my life. I was running somebody else's race. I was trying to impress others and trying to kind of act in a way to fit in on what I thought the recruitment world was and what I thought it needed and what I thought it needed to be respected, but it doesn't. It's not that at all. So what I've learned from that, and my biggest learning is now is run your own race. Like, you don't need to impress anyone, like, because you can become exhausted running somebody else's race. Just focus on yourself, focus on what's important to you, because true wealth is memories, and it's being able to look back and like I said, we spoke offline just before we started about my daughter's first birthday the other day, and how I just spent the entire day with her, just literally creating memories, taking photos, playing in the garden, because that's what's important, and that's what true wealth is. And that's what you're going to be remembered for, is the legacy that you leave behind, not the cars or the watches or the number of contractors or the achievements that you did. It's about the legacy, and it's about the people you leave behind, and how you affected them, and how they are. And so that's the thing that I really learned from that, from my biggest failing was me thinking that in order to be successful in recruitment, I had to be somebody that I wasn't. And so any advice to young men who listen to this, who maybe are going through the same thing, because it's incredibly tough being a young man at the moment. And I do quite a lot of stuff for mental health for young men. And I'm in the middle of writing a book at the moment as well. But it's incredibly tough, because you have to try, and it's in our nature to be competitive, and that evolutionary psychology is too imprinted in our brains to ever go. So it'll always be the same. But anyone listening to this who thinks that they have to be a certain way, or they have to have a certain bravado, you don't at all. Just be yourself, focus on what's important, get your processes in place, make your placements, make your money, and then enjoy the memories that come with it, not the materialistic stuff, because that doesn't matter. And that's, for me, was my biggest learning curve over the last few years, and from the failings that I had for a good 5 years, was just this character that I created and then eventually believed in. Because like anything, if you say it enough, you believe it. I believed I was bulletproof, and we're not bulletproof at all. So yeah, that for me is my biggest failing, but I feel like it's turned me on my head as a person, and for the better. So that's what I kind of learned from it, and continue to kind of share that story with lots of other young men working in recruitment now.
So, I mean, that is a powerful story, and I've got to thank you for your honesty, because there's huge amount of value in that, and having, certainly within recruitment, been in and around recruitment for so long, I've worked with people like that. I would have to say I've never been anything but me, because my character is kind of that monotone, level-headed, considered person that never really fitted in, and I'm comfortable with that. Yeah, but I think amazing. Recruitment almost has the expectation and the perception that you need to be the loudest one in the room. You need to be the one that's constantly ringing that bell and high-fiving as you go down the hallway. And I think quite often we can get lost in that. And I mean, you mentioned about mental health. Mental health in recruitment, really is relatively new. It's only really been happening since the pandemic.
Definitely. That's why the work that Rhonda D'Ambrosio is doing, and I'm very proud to be part of that group with her, and the movement that she's doing, which obviously started, like you said, just before the pandemic, is so important, because it is rife in recruitment, the struggles that people face, both men and women, of course. But obviously my experience is obviously me being a man, so that's why I kind of share it and focus with other young men, and trying to help and kind of get them to help spot the red flags before it becomes too far gone.
I think within that as well, I think social media has a lot to answer for along them lines, because we get swept away with the glamour, the kind of fast cars, the beautiful mansions and luxurious holidays, and we think it's normal, and we think everyone's experiencing that except me. So I need a bit, and quite often it's not that at all. It's borrowed photos, it's hired jets, it's can I just take a photo in your jet because I need to put it on my Instagram, and you get swept away by the story and the perception.
Exactly. The watch is on a monthly payment plan, the car's leased. It's like it's for a lot of people, it's about looking rich, not being rich. And I think that's the key thing, is what people do is, like you said, watches are on payment plans, cars are leased, bachelor pads are rented. It's like, great, it looks good, but what does it mean at the end of the day when tomorrow is an uncertainty? It means absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and you're living proof of that. You've had those horrible moments, those scares where it's on a knife edge, and you're in a position where you consider what's true wealth and what's most important in life. And obviously we don't all get to experience that, and we don't get to that point. But I think people listening to this podcast get to share in your journey and understand it a little bit better, in the fact that
that's the goal.
Yeah, you can be successful in recruitment. You don't have to be that person that's kind of jumping up and down and being the loudest person. You can beaver away in the background and be a success.
For sure. Definitely.
Okay, so obviously around us, I'm a firm advocate that you have mentors and coaches and just general positive people around you. Having a good group of people around you help elevate you and get you to where you are perhaps heading. Who would you say have been perhaps the most influential people to you? Who've been the people that you've turned to or listened to that have got you through perhaps some of the dark days, or actually just got you to new levels of performance?
Of course. So for me, I think the first person to have an influence on my life was my granddad. He really instilled firstly, the importance of manners, how important manners are in life. Mm-hmm. He was always a huge advocate that as soon as we could talk, our first words were please and thank you, because he says manners will get you everywhere. He was a hugely successful businessman. He left school when he was 12 with no qualifications, worked in a sausage factory for a while, and then ended up working on a building site. And then, long story short, ended up owning the building company and ended up building most of the southeast of England, actually, very successful, and then retired by the age of 50. So he was hugely successful. So he always said that in business and in life, manners will get you a long way. So that was one thing. And then another thing was work ethic. Nothing's ever given. So you always have to work hard and really sort of put the effort in if you want to really kind of earn anything or be a success in life is to work hard. And so for me, that's a massive part of my life is work ethic. Like I'm non-stop, and to be honest, I probably need to taper off a little bit and be a little bit better at it. And then the third thing that he taught me is always ask people questions. Whenever you meet someone, ask them a question. He's like, because always show an interest, because you never know who you're going to meet and what you're going to learn from them. And for me, that's one of the coolest bits of advice I'd ever been given, and maybe why I've ended up working in recruitment. But he always said, people, you never know who you're going to meet. People all have stories. People all have journeys and experiences. So never judge someone until you know their story. And I think that was a really cool bit of advice that really had an impact on me, was constantly learn. So I love talking to new people, meeting new people. Lockdown's kind of been quite cool for me because I'm able to get hold of way more people than I'd ever been able to get hold of before. And I've got connections now that I wouldn't have dreamed of having in normal times, because they just would have been too busy and not able to pick up the phone. So that's one of the really cool things that he taught me was always ask people questions, because you can learn. You never know when you're going to learn. And I suppose another person who's a bit more off the wall, or actually on the wall, is Tiger Woods. So from a sporting perspective. Now, I understand, obviously, he had his misdemeanors, and that's not the part of him that I admire and aspire to. The bit that I admire and aspire to is his ability to come in and kind of see a sport and go, all right, I see how you've been doing it, but I've got another way, and just completely rewrote how golf was to be played and how it was to be done. And I had the privilege of meeting him when I was younger. And they say never meet your heroes, but he was an absolute gentleman. He gave me all the time in the world. He let me ask loads of questions. He signed my hat. He was an absolute gentleman. And then obviously a couple of years ago, he had the back injuries and knee injuries, where he was told that he'd probably never play golf again. But through hard work, determination, endeavour, he managed to bring himself back around, recovered, rehabbed. And then for those of you watching this on with the video, the photo behind me is him winning the Masters after being told that it was impossible for him to play golf again. So for me, that's like my motivation picture. So him from a sporting perspective, he's had a huge influence on me in terms of, see what's in front of you, but don't be afraid to try something different. But then equally, never be told no. If you want something enough, you can go back and go back to the top of the mountain. So for me, they're the two people that have probably had the biggest impact. And then my girls, my wife and my little girl, they're the more recent ones. They're the more recent ones. Everything's for them. So they've had a huge impact on me as well. But in terms of life experience, how I am and my character, Granddad was number one, then Tiger Woods, and then my girls.
Yeah, I love that. I love them answers. I love the idea of asking questions. And I think from a selfish perspective, yes, I've created this podcast because I like to offer value and content back to a network that has continued to grow. But from a really selfish perspective, I really enjoy talking to people.
Yeah, it's cool, isn't it?
I even said prior to coming in here to talk to you today, to the guys and girls in the office, I said I just genuinely enjoy talking, because you get little nuggets of information. You get to understand how people work and what they're about. And you genuinely come away a better person if you go in with, I suppose, I come into these podcast conversations to genuinely learn and get to know someone. And I care about the conversation. I care about the answers. And I love the stories. And I think that's the most important bit. I mean, and you've covered that. Okay, so... Sorry, say that again.
You're always learning. And every day, never ever stop learning. And like I say, the more people you talk to, the more you get to learn. My favourite saying is, you can't say what you don't know. So basically, if you're the one talking, then you're not learning, because you already know that stuff, because that's why you're saying it. So if you're the one quiet, it means you're learning, which means you're improving. So I massively agree.
I was told a few years ago that the worst 3 words in the English language was "I know that," because you've instantly cut the conversation. Yeah. And that's stuck with me for years, because it's the ability to think, you don't know it. 15 years of recruiting the same desk, I don't know all the answers. And there'll be a scenario that will come up in tomorrow, today, next week, whenever it might be. And you still have to think or go to someone and say, how would you deal with this?
Exactly. Especially after what we've just experienced. You think about the last 18 months. No one knows what's going to happen, in terms of the bounce back of the economy, how it's going to last, housing market, all this kind of stuff. It's like, well, we don't know. So everyone's on the same playing field. So like I said, it's all about having an open mind, growth mindset, and ask questions.
Fantastic. Okay, so in terms of our listeners, anybody that's enjoyed listening to you speak today, where is the best place for them to come and find you and connect with you?
Best place for me is probably LinkedIn. Every day I put out content for leaders or about high performance or development and culture stuff. So LinkedIn's probably the best place for me. So Michael Whatman on LinkedIn, big square head in the photo. So feel free to connect. I connect with everyone. So feel free to. LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me, and also follow the content as well to keep getting stuff to help you along your way.
Good stuff. Well, we'll put the link in the notes as well, so people will be able to connect quite easily with you. So to kind of reach a conclusion, I always ask my guests if there's one single piece of advice that you would offer to our listeners. What would you perhaps offer and allow them to take away with them and perhaps implement?
Of course. So I think we kind of covered it a little bit earlier, but for me, it's so important at the moment is just to run your own race. Understand what's important to you, have clarity on what you want to achieve, and understand how you're going to get there, and then just focus on your lane. Don't worry about what the person next to you is doing. Don't worry about next week. Don't worry about next month. Just focus on the here and now. Be present in what you're doing, and focus on what's important to you. And if there's any, like I said, any 4 words, just to remember that by, just run your own race. Because I promise you, if you increase your clarity in where you're trying to get to, and you increase the clarity on how you're going to get there, you will notice an improvement in your own performance, because the calories you're using are being channeled in the right direction, rather than being over here, over there, and spreading yourself too thin. If you have that clarity, you understand where you're going, you understand how to get there, and you know the channel to run in, all the energy is going in the right direction. So your performance will go up without having to burn any more calories. All right. So just run your own race and stick with it, because you'll get there. You'll always get there. Or go and sign up to the next Team Head Coach program. That's also a good bit of advice. But if not, then run your own race.
Good stuff. I've loved every single minute of that. Thank you so much for spending some time with me.
Thanks, Steve. It's been a pleasure.